the Meistersinger. It's mainly in Germany, but it will give you an idea of how stage design and its production evolved, but not until really after World War II. And you'll see why when we get going in the talk. This is the first rough draft from 1845 of Wagner. And Wagner was one of the geniuses of staging. Every draft of his operas have very detailed staging instructions. And sometimes he would put in an illustration. For example, over here, you'll see that this is the second act layout. And this is 20 years before he started to really compose the opera. Now, granted, he had the textbook done by 1863, but the music really didn't get started until several years later. So, Meistersinger was made possible by the patronage of King Ludwig when he was called to the court in 1863. And then he was able to produce Tristan and Isolde for the first time in 1865. And so we have the wonderful portraits of the two gentlemen, of King Ludwig and Richard Wagner at that time. This portrait of Wagner is owned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, but it's on permanent loan to the Metropolitan Opera, which is in their Rogues Gallery. Where that is right now, I'm not sure, but you can see it there when you make your next trip to the Met. So the first performance was at the Munich National Theater and the Royal Opera, so to speak. And this is before World War II, obviously. We can see over the main, how many of you been there to the National Theater? Most of you, okay. You remember that there's called the Residenztheater, and then there's the Schauspielhaus. The Quigley's Theater is in a different location, but we have here, of course, is the main opera house, and then in here is where the Quigley's Theater used to be, the old Baroque theater. I'm sure many of you have seen it. And then up here was the garden, the roof garden of the king, and this over here was the residence. And this particular picture ought to be very familiar. The theater was destroyed in World War II, 1944, and then it was built almost as it was before the war. And so this just gives you an idea of the space that Wagner worked in. And so we have the first performances on June 21st of 1868. And Wagner prepared the rehearsals. He supervised the rehearsal. There was a stage director, but he really functioned as an assistant. And so he had 3 months of rehearsals. The chorus had 66 rehearsals with Hans Richter, who would then become one of Wagner's, who was already then Wagner's protege. He made it a condition that Richter would be there to do the musical preparations for the opera. And so, what did it look like in those days? And so what I've done is a little bit of monkeying around. Do you remember the auditorium in the National Theater with this wonderful red and gold curtain? Well, if you imagine that the music of the overture is now making the transition to the first scene, and this is what it might have looked like. And that's the model of the original production. Now, for those of you who go back to Munich next time, take a trip to Herrn Chiemsee. It's about 45 minutes outside of Munich. It's the Versailles imitation of one of King Ludwig's castles. In one of the rooms is dedicated to Wagner, and you will see all of the stage models that were created by the designers for the first performances in Munich. And the models are really quite small at that size. But this gives you an idea, I hope, in somewhat of a scale of the, you know, I'm going to try and turn off the lights.
Good idea.
Oops. No. Oh no.
One.
There we go.
Ah, brilliant.
Disco lights.
Disco lights, yeah. Well, that's
Better, yes, now you can get a real idea of what it is. So we have then, that's the first step in the church. And then, perfect. And then the next scene, and that is the second act. And this is a model, again, of what the second act would look like. And you'll see on your left is Hans Sachs' house, and on the right, where the bush is the tree, that's Pogner. And then we come to the final scene.
Are those actual pictures of the model? Are those actual pictures of the...
Those are actual pictures of the models. And then we have the Festwiese, and that's the final scene of the opera. These became the model for other theaters. How we had no internet, newspapers were slow, mail was slow, so how did the other theaters find out about this and then use these designs? It is the press reports that at the dress rehearsal, the final dress rehearsal, the Generalprobe, there were at least 50 people from the other theaters in Germany and Austria that came, theater directors, stage designers, intendants. They all came to see what the fuss was all about. And then they see this, and so they would then purchase the settings from the workshops of the designer. So it's like most of the theaters, with the exception of, say, Berlin, Munich, maybe Frankfurt, all of the other theaters had no scene shop. And so they were purchasing the complete sets. And that's how they found out about it. And then they would order the sets from the designers. And that's these people. Karl von Perfall was the theater director, the intendant, and Wagner always butted heads against him. And so, but they managed to get the production going. Heinrich Sturr is one of the stage designers. You had stage designers for exteriors, you had stage designers for the interiors. And so it was not one single designer in Munich, as it is, say, today, but they all had their particular areas of expertise. And these were two brothers, and they did most of the stage designs and settings for the Munich Opera. And then you had Christian Jank, who was very much involved in Neuschwanstein, and designing it. What you see now today is the Disneyland Castle was a takeoff of Neuschwanstein. And the gentleman on the left is Franz Seitz. He was one of the technical directors, and he did the costumes. And so we have here then the costumes of Eva and Walter von Stolzing. And that's what they looked like in their photographs. So you see they're closely related to the designs. And all of these then followed to the other theaters. And Wagner professed to be the happiest when he did the staging rehearsals. And then when the performance at the premiere happened, King Ludwig insisted that Wagner sit with him in the royal box. And then he insisted that Wagner take a bow from the royal box, which was a breach of protocol. And that's why there are people, you get this caricature here that's mocking Wagner. A wonderful German word called meckern, and that's to mock, make fun of, but in a very negative way. And so you see how he's taking his applause, and everybody in the boxes are shocked because he's supposed to be on stage and not in the royal box. Now, who would be a forerunner of Beckmesser? If you remember, Wagner spent years in Paris, unhappy, starving, doing hack work for publishers, and trying to make a success, and with Meyerbeer and so on. I'm convinced that it's not only Edward Hanslick, the music critic of the Vienna newspaper, but I am convinced that Beckmesser is modeled off of this person, who was a bureaucrat. And in German, they call him a Beamter. Now, Beamter can be a regular, he's a Beamter, he's a bureaucrat. But it can also, if it's said in a certain way, a Beamter is a very negative term. And so this was a bureaucrat in Paris. And he has the quill pen instead of the rubber stamp. And so Wagner had to run up against these people. And so this I found, and I bought it, it's from a satirical newspaper, Chiavari, from Paris. And this is 1845. And so I thought that this had to be an experience that Wagner had when he was trying to go from one office to the other, and so on. We all know this theater, don't we? I'm just asking, has everybody been to Bayreuth? How many of you have been to Bayreuth? 3/4 of you, most of you. Okay, well, we know this theater and we love this theater. But what I'd like to show you now is the production from 1888. And this is one of the models that is in the Hauswandry. And I encourage you, next time you're in Bayreuth, to go and see the newly renovated. Was anybody in Bayreuth this summer? Did you see the Hauswandry when it opened?
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It's
The
supposed to be
archive is
absolutely
beautiful.
incredible. What they renovated the entire house, and they put in underground rooms for exhibit space, and there's a coffee house off to the side. And one of the Wagner daughters said, "This is terrible. How can you have a coffee house near the grave of the master?" Anyway, so this is one of the models, and it gives you an idea of what the sets in Bayreuth look like, which became, hello, come on in, which became also a model for other theaters. After the Wagner performances in Bayreuth began with the Meistersinger in 1888, and then later on, the set designs were provided by the brothers Bruckner in Coburg, and this is their pink studio. And the Bruckner brothers were one of the big purveyors of Wagnerian stage settings. And so all of the theaters would go to the Bruckner brothers, not just necessarily for the Wagner, but other operas as well. But they provided the model, and they worked closely with Cosima, who became the Hüter of Bayreuth, in the guardian of the legacy of Wagner. And so then we move on to Paris, 1896. And many of you have been to the Palais Garnier, the old opera house, not the awful one in the Bastille. But you see, in 1896, they did an extravagant production of Meistersinger, which was really the first performances in Paris of that opera. And so there exist the stage models for the 1896 production. And you will notice that there are the similarities from Bayreuth, from Munich. And so we have the first act. I love raising curtains. And then do you see here is the second act? Remember the model from 1868. And then you will see other productions of that as well. Ansak's shoe shop, if you will. And then the final scene. They are all the same from the previous years, since 1868. This was at the Prinzregenten Theater in 1911, and when they had a big Wagner festival. And then again, you see the similarities. They're all the same. Again, with the costumes. Old world, old Nuremberg. Now, Wagner did not want a pictorial absolute reproduction of old Nuremberg. That was the insistence of King Ludwig. But he wanted it to be based on Nuremberg, but not a pictorial representation. And again, the costumes for the ladies and Bobby. And this is the Bayreuth production in 1911, again from the Bruckner studio. It's changed a bit, but it's still basically the same. The chorus is on the left, and then there's the door, and then you have the main acting space. And then here's the second act. Recognize that from Paris, as well as in the year-over-year production? All the same. All the theaters would do this. Ensemble Studio and the Festspiele. Now, in 1935 was the big, notorious, if you will, production of the Meistersinger. I'm going to skip over this because I'm going to give you a surprise at the end. So, hang on. Now, Bayreuth in 1943. And who did the settings? Wieland Wagner. The same as the others, isn't it? Not much difference. Now we get to
Die
1943.
Festwiese mit dem Schlusschor der Meistersinger, ein Filmdokument von 1938. Aus jener Ära.
Don't pay any attention to the narration. The music will come in a second. Can you hear it? So the war is over. Bayreuth reopens once more in 1951. Rudolf Hartmann, who was many years the intendant of the National Theater in Munich, did the production of the Meistersinger. This is a rehearsal of the final scene of the opera. There's the church, same old-fashioned. As in contrast to many of you I know were aware of Wieland's staging of The Ring and of Parsifal, which shocked everybody. And then they came to the Meistersinger, and everybody was relieved. The old-fashioned, no quote-unquote Regie theater. Recognize it? It's the same as the others. Now, here comes 1956 with Wieland Wagner. And then he makes his own production of the Meistersinger. It's the first act. There's no church like we recognize anymore. Walter is in the corner at the back. You see, he is looking over at Eva, who's over here. And the chorus is facing the audience. So you don't see the Katharina Church. This was the scene that roiled the entire world of Wagner at Bayreuth. It became known as Die Meistersinger ohne Nuremberg. The Master Singers without Nuremberg, because there is absolutely nothing there that shows that it's in Nuremberg. It's just the linden tree, the bush over on the right, and this is the beginning, and then it goes into this absolutely beautiful scene with Hans Sachs. But I will tell you, and this is the sextet, or the quartet, sorry. For the first time in the history of Bayreuth Festival, booing was heard in the theater. And this is the final scene. Again, no representation of Nuremberg. You do not see the city in the background. All you see are the flowers on the banners. And it is like of course, on risers. And then I think I have, there we go.
Diese Freiheit der Wiedergabe rief, ein Novum auf dem grünen Hügel, 1956 bei der Aufführung der Meistersinger von Nürnberg, Pfiffe und Buhrufe hervor. Wieland Wagner hatte dieses Werk, das wie kein anderes von vielen als deutsche Nationaloper betrachtet wird, seiner Spitzweg-Idylle entkleidet, es zwischen Johannis Tag und Johannis Nacht wieder in die Nähe des Satirspiels geführt, als dass es ja einst konzipiert wurde, und er hatte die Weltanschauungen aufeinanderprallen.
The next one, you'll hear narration again just for a short moment, but that voice is that of Wieland Wagner.
Dass nach dem Demokraten Wagner die endgültige Entscheidung über Wert und Unwert eines Kunstwerks zu fällen hat.
Nicht notwendig, weil ablenkend vom Thema und damit irreführend, war seiner Ansicht nach der fahnenschwingende, pompöse Aufzug der Meister, der ihn heimlich an Handwerksmessen oder gar Reichsparteitage zu gemahnen schien, da doch gerade nicht die Meister, sondern das Volk die anstehende künstlerische Entscheidung zu fällen hatte. Folgerichtig begab sich der Einzug der Meister neben
That's
sich,
not Wieland.
nur von ihrer eigenen Selbsteinschätzung getragen. Ihre geografische Position auf der Festwiese war der Bühnenrand. Der Blickpunkt blieb selbst beim Preissingen dem Volk reserviert.
This is what the commentary was after the premiere. Here where I find my piece. And it's Wagner hanging himself from the linden tree. And that was the big feeling from a lot of people. Because it was such a fuss about it, and that people were saying, well, we should protect the theater from what would be called today Regie Theater, or Eurotrash, in a way. Wieland wrote a very biting commentary to all of that, and I'd like to read to you the key of that. Those old Wagnerians so gladly bring up the rhetorical question what the master himself would have thought of a modern staging if he were alive today, which is equally as stupid as the question of what Beethoven would have said of Toscanini's interpretation of his Ninth Symphony, or how Goethe might have judged the great actor Gustav Gründgens' Hamburg production of Faust. Only the intellectual and spiritual meaning of a work, not its form of performance, has importance for the future generations, and it ensures its endurance and effect for the future. Now, despite that, Wieland did get the message, and so it changed in a year later to have some reference to Nuremberg. So on your left, you'll see the outlines of the houses of old Nuremberg, and then the final scene, you'll see in the center the classic view of Nuremberg. And then it became a real success, and everybody was happy, and peace was made. I'm going to skip over this. So what did the others? Wieland provided the impetus for other stage directors to do something that is different. And so we have here the Shakespeare stage in Leipzig that was done by the great Joachim Herz in 1960. And then in 1963, Wieland tried it again, this time with the real Shakespeare view. And so you see the balconies. And that's the Schuster, and that with Anna Silla. And I have a recording of this particular act, and her voice just blows you away. But I'm not going to play it. I'm sorry, but so here's the final scene. And then, for those of you who love the real stuff of the old world, this is a Salzburg production of Meistersinger with Günther Schneider-Simpson. You saw last year a version of that from the Met. But the Salzburg stage can take two of the San Francisco opera stages if you put them side by side. And so that's why these settings are so huge, especially the second act, because it used the entire width of the stage. That's the final scene. The last opera production I want to show was what people would say is the so-called infamous production from Hamburg. Unfortunately, there was no video of it, but let me just show you. All of the masters wore the felt beret. And this is Walter von Stolzing being teased by the apprentices. The stage director was Peter Konvichny. His father is the great conductor Franz Konvichny. And this production, one of the reasons why it was such an uproar, you see the Nuremberg in the back there, and then it would slowly blend into the destroyed Nuremberg. And that's Beckmesser after the riot, and he's in Hans Sachs' studio. The notoriety of this production is because you all know the end with Hans Sachs' great speech about honor your German masters. And that was one of the key things that made a lot of people uncomfortable after the war because of its National Socialistic, i.e. Nazi tendencies, which is the honor your German masters, everybody else will fall apart, but the holy German art will survive. And so, at one point during Sachs' closing talk, the music stops. One of the masters says, Hans Sachs, what are you talking about? Let me give you a quick thing about that. One critic noted, the other characters explode. You can't sing that sort of stuff anymore, someone yells. The music grinds to a halt. and the cast started a debate of what constitutes German and genuine. That's nationalism, one of the other Meistersingers shrieks. It only means the preservation of language and tradition, pipes up Eva, the voice of cautious moderation. The foray is halted when the conductor demands the resumption of the music. The audience by this time had erupted into a mixture of jeers and bravos, and the curtain down is the cue for the vociferous stampede from the auditorium by Konvitzny's detractors while his admirers stayed to cheer him. And so that must have been a hell of a show. That's one of the finals. The last one I want to do, how many of you saw the Meistersinger in Bayreuth of Katharina Wagner? Well, apparently it was crazy. But I haven't seen it, so I'm just going to show you, for those of you who have not seen it. It's available on DVD, I believe. And these are the apprentices. I have no idea what this is all about. But again, it was Katharina's. It was supposed to have been a success in a way. A lot of people disagreed with it, but it was a theatrical event. Now we're going to take a leap back. And this is from the 1935 production of the Meistersinger. It was in the presence of the German government, namely Goebbels, but I've cut him out of the picture. And this will give you an idea of what the productions of the old style were. And you're going to probably be amused by the Meistersingers because they're wearing these old costumes and they all look pregnant. So I'll play some of this, and then I need to leave you time for questions. Carl Byrne was the conductor. 48 minutes. I'm going to jump ahead with this. Thank you.